The shadows of night had deepened, yet the bells of St. Michael's Church, located in the heart of the city, rang out loud and clear. The glow of the church lights turned night into day. Hundreds of people were entering in neat rows. But this was no ordinary night of worship. Tonight, faith, logic, and ideologies were about to collide. Inside the church, a grand stage had been set up. On 5 prominent chairs sat 5 well-known pastors. Their names were Fabio Miller, David Thompson, Franco De Luca, Marcus Venedict, and Rafael Gomez. Confidence gleamed on each of their faces. They had debated across many countries, and in their minds, tonight was the golden opportunity to publicly discredit Islam. Fabio Miller, the chief priest of the church, was the first to approach the microphone. With a mocking tone, he declared, "Tonight, we gather to expose the falsehood. If there is any truth in the God of Muhammad, let his representative face us now." Laughter erupted in the church. Some whistled. Others clapped mockingly. It felt as though the verdict had already been passed. David Thompson stepped forward and boldly announced, "If any Muslim dares to stand against our arguments tonight, we promise all 5 of us will accept Islam." The church doors were still open when a sudden gust of cold, silent wind swept in. All eyes turned toward the entrance. A young man in white clothing appeared, walking from the direction of the mosque. In his hand was a Quran, and a clean white turban adorned his head. There was no fear in his eyes, only serenity. "Who is he?" someone whispered. "Did he come alone? He must be mad," another chuckled. But the young man kept walking. His name was Ahmad, a simple young man from the outskirts of the city. And yet, with unshakable faith in Allah in his heart, he walked into that crowded church alone. His steps did not falter. He walked straight to the front of the stage and stood still. He looked at all 5 pastors calmly, then raised his voice and said, "You called upon a follower of Muhammad, and so I have come. I do not fear you, because I carry with me the words of Allah. If it is a debate you seek, then I am ready." The laughter vanished. Silence fell over the church hall. The crowd, which moments ago echoed with ridicule and noise, now watched Ahmad in complete stillness. Dressed in white with a composed face, holding the Quran in his hand and confidence in his voice. His very presence had shifted the entire atmosphere. Fabio Miller cleared his throat and took the microphone again. Though he still tried to hide it, there was a hint of unease in his tone. "Ahmad, if you truly claim to represent Islam, then tell me this. If your God is merciful and compassionate, then why does the Quran command war? Does your God bear hostility toward his own creation?" A murmur ran through the audience. Smirks returned to a few faces. Perhaps they believed Ahmad would now be silenced. But Ahmad remained calm. He gently opened the Quran, searched for the verse, and began to recite aloud. Then Ahmad translated calmly, "Fight in the cause of Allah those who fight you, but do not transgress limits. Indeed, Allah does not like transgressors." He looked out at the audience. "We have not been commanded to attack, but only to defend. If your scripture forbids insulting enemies, then know that the Quran teaches us not to oppress even our enemies." A flicker of irritation crossed Fabio's face. Ahmad's words carried power, but his manner was gentle. Dr. Marcus Venedict interrupted. "So are you saying Islam teaches love? Yet your prophet fought many battles." Ahmad smiled. "Yes, our prophet fought battles, but only when the oppression crossed all bounds. This same prophet forgave the people of Taif who stoned him until he bled. This same prophet, on the day he conquered Makkah, turned to his lifelong enemies and said, 'Today, there is no blame on you. Go, you are all free.'" Some in the crowd exchanged surprised glances. This was not the Muhammad they had imagined, a man known only for war, not mercy. Pastor David Thompson took over. "Fine then, but why didn't your prophet show any miracle in front of everyone, like Moses splitting the sea or Jesus raising the dead. Ahmad paused briefly, then pressed the Quran gently to his chest and said, "The greatest miracle of our prophet is this book, preserved for over 1400 years without a single letter changed. A book that turned desert nomads into rulers. A book that taught justice in an age of tyranny." Then he asked, "Do you have a single book, without a doubt over even one word?" An old woman seated at the back instinctively clutched her Bible tighter. Tears welled in her eyes, as if a long-buried question had just awakened in her heart. A strange stillness swept across the church. The same crowd that had mocked Ahmad minutes ago now listened intently to his every word. His tone was soft, his manner composed, and his words pierced through hearts with undeniable conviction. Pastor Franco De Luca stepped forward. His voice had a slight tremble, yet he tried to keep debating. "If the Quran is truly divine, then what makes it so special? There are thousands of books in the world. Why are your prophet's words considered a miracle?" Ahmad closed his eyes for a moment, as if he were feeling something from within. Then he spoke softly. "When I read the Quran, my heart finds peace. These are not just words, they are light. Each verse slices through the heart and enters the mind. One drowning in sin, it saves him. One feeling lost, it brings him close to Allah." He continued, "This book was revealed in the deserts of Arabia, and yet today it is the most read book in the world. For 14 centuries it has issued a challenge. If you doubt this revelation, then produce a single verse like it. But no one ever could, because it is the word of Allah, not man." Franco opened his mouth as if to respond, but his lips fell silent. He sensed he was standing before someone whose words carried the weight of truth. Just then, a soft sob was heard from the back. It was the same elderly woman clutching her Bible, now wiping her tears. A young girl beside her leaned in and whispered, "Grandma, what's wrong?" The old woman lowered her head and whispered, "All my life, I believed we were the ones upon truth. But today my heart says, perhaps I've been far from it." The sight of this emotional moment moved many in the audience to tears. This was no longer just a battle of logic. It had become a battle of the soul. Pastor Marcus Venedict quickly tried to regain control. "All right, Ahmad, if you say that Muhammad is the final prophet, then tell us, what is the status of Jesus in Islam? Do you not believe in him?" Ahmad answered with deep respect, "We believe in Jesus, peace be upon him, as a noble prophet of Allah. We do not call him God, but we certainly do not reject him either. The Quran tells us that Jesus was born without a father, just as Adam was born without both a father and a mother. Yet they were both human, not divine." Then Ahmad recited the verse, "Jesus will never disdain being a servant of Allah." It was as if a fire had been lit in the hearts of those seated in the church. Not a fire of anger, but of truth. A fire that burned away falsehood and illuminated the soul. The atmosphere inside the church had transformed. Gone were the mocking laughs and sarcastic jeers. Every eye, every heart was now fixed on Ahmad. Each of his words seemed to land deep within the listeners. The 5 pastors, once upright and confident, were now each slowly retreating, their arguments weakening, replaced not by more counterpoints, but by unspoken questions, this time within the hearts of the crowd. Pastor Rafael Gomez, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward slowly. His voice was soft, but carried a deep weight beneath. "Ahmad, you've spoken of the greatness of the Quran and the prophethood of Muhammad. But tell me, if your God is so merciful, why did he create hell? If he truly wanted, couldn't he have placed everyone in paradise?" It was a question that had long lived in the hearts of many. Even a young girl in the audience thought to herself, "Yes, I've often wondered this too." Ahmad took a deep breath, then gently closed the Quran and held it close to his chest. Yes, Allah is most merciful, but He is also just. Would you want a murderer and an innocent child to be treated the same? Justice demands that the good be rewarded and the evil held accountable. He continued, Hell was not made for people, but for the actions they chose. Allah never closes His doors. We are the ones who turn away. The silence in the church grew deeper. Heads began to lower, as if each person was reflecting on their own life. Eyes welled up. The spiritual atmosphere had shifted. Hearts were being stirred. Ahmad's sincere reply had shaken Pastor Raphael from within. He blinked, cleared his throat, and stepped back. For the first time, visible unease marked his face. Now it was Pastor David Thompson's turn, the one who had appeared most confident at the beginning. Even his steps seemed hesitant now. If Islam is so clear and evident, he asked slowly, then why haven't more people embraced it? After all, Christianity is still the largest religion in the world. Ahmad replied gently, Truth is not measured by majority. It is measured by reason and evidence. If numbers were the standard, then Prophet Noah wouldn't have been on the truth, for only a few followed him. Truth often stands alone, but its power lies not in quantity, but in clarity. He continued, If hearts sitting here today are being stirred into reflection, then that is the effect of truth, not the dominance of numbers. A young man in the crowd leaned over to the person next to him and whispered, Do you feel something moving in your heart too? The only response was silence, but that silence spoke louder than any words. The church bell struck 8. Time was passing, yet inside the church, each moment felt as if it had frozen in place. Ahmad still stood alone, but the weight of his words had silenced all 5 pastors. The young man who came with no invitation, but for the sake of Allah, had now captured every heart in the church. Pastor Fabio Miller, who had initiated this entire debate, was now more defined by his silence than his questions. He glanced at his notes again and again, but the words no longer helped him. Gently, he asked, Ahmad, you claim that Muhammad is the final prophet. If that's true, then why did God stop sending prophets? Doesn't humanity still need guidance? Ahmad lifted his gaze and looked directly into Fabio's eyes, then said, When Allah began the chain of prophethood with Adam, each messenger came with a specific message for a specific people. But when Muhammad was sent, he came for all of mankind. And with him came the Quran, a complete, eternal guidance. After that, no new prophet is needed. No new message is required. Then he paused for a moment and added, When guidance is already perfect, what need is there for anything more? Do you light a candle after the sun has already risen? Hearing these words, many faces in the church wore expressions of surprise and silent reflection. People began to ask themselves questions that had never surfaced in their hearts before, questions buried for years. In one corner of the church, a young man who had always filled the air with hymns from the Bible now sat silently, his eyes fixed on the Quran in Ahmad's hands. Is this the same religion we always called extreme, he wondered? Why is there so much peace in this young man's words? Ahmad spoke gently. Islam is the path of guidance. It is not forced upon anyone. The Quran says, there is no compulsion in religion. But when someone hears the truth and still rejects it, that is their choice to turn away from light. Pastor Marcus snapped back, a trace of frustration in his voice. But your religion has harsh commands for non-believers. Ahmad calmly responded, What do you think harshness is? Speaking the truth or remaining silent on a lie? We do not hate anyone, but to hide the truth is a form of injustice. We do not fight with people. We engage with reason. Whatever the heart accepts, that is what is true. An elderly man in the audience, who had worshipped in that church for decades, whispered softly, In all my years, I've never heard a Muslim speak like this. Maybe we've misunderstood them all along." Ahmad stood quietly, yet it was as if light was radiating from his presence. Islam now spoke not through his tongue, but through his calm, dignified conduct. The thunderous voices that once echoed before the debate had vanished. Now, words had grown fewer, and thoughts had grown deeper. Each person felt a subtle glow stirring within their soul. The 5 pastors who once believed they would defeat Islam tonight now found themselves standing in the courtroom of their own hearts, facing questions not from the crowd, but from within. Ahmad picked up the mic and said with humble clarity, "I did not come here to humiliate anyone. I only speak the truth that my Lord has commanded me to share. If you think I am wrong, then show me with reason. But if your own heart whispers that this is the truth, then don't fight it out of pride." Pastor Franco De Luca took a deep breath. A shimmer of moisture glistened in his eyes. "Ahmad, all my life I've taught others to cling to their scripture. But today, even my own book does not calm my heart. What you speak, it carries a strange tranquility." Ahmad replied softly, "When a person hears truth, their soul stirs. Sometimes logic may fall silent, but the heart bears witness." Just then, a young man on one side of the church stood up and declared, "I've been coming here since childhood. I prayed every Sunday. But today, when you read from the Quran, my heart trembled for the first time and said, 'This is what I've been searching for all along.'" Once again, silence fell over the church. But this time, it wasn't a silence of fear. It was a silence full of humility and the heavy feeling of long-lost realization. Pastor Raphael looked at his fellow clergymen. The confidence they once wore like armor was now gone. "We began this as a challenge," he said quietly, "but it has become a voice of guidance." Then Ahmad asked one final question. "If any of you still seeks the truth in your heart, open the Quran. Don't listen to my words. Listen to the words of Allah. Truth never hides, if you search for it with sincerity." Tears streamed down many faces. Some covered their eyes with trembling hands. Others sat still, hearts shaking with emotion. The church that once echoed only with the sound of Christian sermons had now been softened by the gentleness of Allah's word. Ahmad quietly closed the Quran and pressed it close to his chest. "I have conveyed the truth," Ahmad said calmly. "Now it is up to you, whether you accept it with your heart or reject it out of pride." The silence within the church had shifted into something deeper, a quiet unrest. Every soul, whether priest or ordinary attendee, was now grappling with a storm of inner questions. Ahmad's tone was never aggressive, never disrespectful, but his words carried a strange power, as if he wasn't merely debating, but holding up a mirror to each soul. Pastor David Thompson approached the microphone once more, but this time his voice had softened. "Ahmad, if your religion is truly the truth, then why doesn't the whole world accept it? Why are there so many questions, so much hatred, so many divisions against it?" Ahmad smiled gently. "Have you ever measured truth by popularity? If that were so, then Prophet Noah, who had only a few followers, would not have been on the truth. Abraham, who stood alone against his nation, would not be called the friend of God. Moses would not have faced Pharaoh alone. Truth is often lonely in the beginning, but its light slowly enters hearts, and then it brings a change that no storm can stop." He turned toward the crowd and asked, "Have you listened to today's words without bias? Have you truly asked your heart whether the path you are on is really the truth?" From the back of the church, a voice rose. It was the elderly woman who had been quietly weeping since the beginning. She stood up and said, "All my life I read the Bible, but the peace I felt in the verses of your Quran today, I never found in any of my prayers." Silence no longer ruled. Soft sobs could now be heard throughout the church. Many were bent over in their chairs, covering their eyes with trembling hands. A young man, wearing a white cross, gently removed the necklace and tucked it into his pocket. This emotional shift was silent but mighty. Pastor Fabio, once the driving force behind this debate, now stepped toward the mic. But he no longer spoke like a victor. His voice resembled that of a broken man. "Ahmad, what you said. My mind may struggle to accept it, but my heart refuses to stay silent. I want to know the truth, truly." Ahmad looked him in the eyes and said, "Then read the Quran. Alone, not with a Muslim beside you, just you, in solitude, and pray to Allah. If this is truly your word, then open my heart to it. If you ask with sincerity, Allah will surely show you." This was no longer a debate. It had become a moment of guidance. That grand cathedral, once lit up with the intention of defeating Islam, was now drowning in a silence so heavy, only the beating of hearts could be heard. The eyes of those seated were wet. Their hearts were trembling. Their minds were awakening. Ahmad stood still, because now the decision belonged to them. Pastor Marcus Venedict, who had always been the first to quote theology, philosophy, and logic, slowly walked to the edge of the stage. He stood before the microphone. But this time, there was no pride in his tone, only weariness. "I've spent my whole life studying religion, every sect, every ideology. But today, I've begun questioning my own teachings." He looked at Ahmad. "You didn't just give arguments, you awakened the heart." Many young students in the audience, trained for years under these very pastors, now sat with their eyes downcast. No arrogance on their faces, no sarcasm on their lips. There was only one thing in the air: submission and searching. Then suddenly, the young man who had removed his cross stood up. His voice was choked, but his words came from the soul. "I want to understand Islam. I want to follow truth, not just live in the shadow of my parents' beliefs." Ahmad looked at him with compassion and simply said, "Then come, with the Quran, in silence, with a prayer to Allah." Pastor Rafael Gomez covered his face with his hands. His shoulders were trembling. He was crying, perhaps for the first time, from the heart. The very man known for the church's most forceful arguments was now quietly breaking. At that moment, Ahmad spoke with profound humility. "I do not force you. I only present the truth. If your heart is truly seeking light, then by Allah, you will surely find it. But if you seek only to argue, then I remain silent, for guidance does not come through force. It comes through the heart." The church doors remained open, just as they had been when Ahmad first walked in. But this time, it wasn't just a breeze that passed through them, it was the silent shift of hearts. Beyond those doors, truth waited patiently for those who had truly listened to it for the very first time. Pastor Fabio, who had sat in silence for a long while, slowly stood. He looked at Ahmad and spoke a single sentence, a sentence that would soon echo beyond the walls of the church and into the entire city. "I do not surrender to defeat. I submit to guidance." That one sentence struck the very foundations of the church. "I do not surrender to defeat. I submit to guidance." A moment followed, so still, so profound, that the silence felt like a spiritual adhan. Every eye paused, every breath held. It was as if time itself had frozen. Ahmad lowered his gaze as though he knew Allah's help had arrived. This was not his personal victory. This was the triumph of the Quran's light, a moment for which he had prepared for months through prayers, tears, and his mother's heartfelt supplications was now unfolding before his very eyes. Pastor Franco de Luca quietly removed the cross from around his neck and held it gently in his hand. "All my life, I believed this symbol was God. But today I understand. A symbol is not God, it only points the way. And today, I see that way in the Quran." Soft sobs began to rise throughout the church. The same people who had once rejected the Quran as impure were now sitting with hands pressed to their chests, overwhelmed by the words they had heard. Pastor David Thompson took the microphone, his voice trembling. "If this is guidance, then I feel no shame in bowing to it. I testify that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." The effect was like a spiritual earthquake. Tears, prostrations, and slowly, softly, others began repeating after him, "Ashhadu alla ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." Pastors Marcus, Raphael, and Franco all closed their books and stepped down toward Ahmad. He embraced each of them, not with pride but with brotherhood, like one who is reunited with lost family. A young woman standing on the church stairs, once fearful even of the name Islam, now spoke with a trembling voice. "I want my children to grow up with truth, not hate. If this is the Islam Ahmad has shown, then I want to enter it too." Then came a moment, one that could never be captured fully by any camera, only preserved in hearts. The 5 pastors, who had come to disprove Islam, now stood beside Ahmad on the stage, their hands raised together, declaring the Shahada. Behind them, a crowd of people closed their eyes, and in the quiet of their souls echoed that same testimony. The church hall, once filled with arguments, debates, and mockery, was now immersed in the remembrance of Allah. The 5 pastors, who once vowed to reject Islam, now sat with the Quran pressed to their hearts. The tears in their eyes were no longer from defeat, but from acceptance. At the back of the hall, men, women, the elderly, and the youth all stood silently. This was the moment when a human heart sees its entire past in a new light. The moment when everything you thought you knew is replaced by a truth you feel. Pastor Fabio, who had led this church for years, now sat humbly at Ahmad's feet. He held Ahmad's hand and whispered, "I have spent my life teaching others how to worship. But today, for the first time, I have felt what worship really is." Tears streamed down Ahmad's face as well. He quietly replied, "This is not my victory. This is the triumph of the Quran's truth." A few moments later, Ahmad asked everyone to sit in silence. Then he opened the Quran and recited from Surah An-Nur, "Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. Allahu nuru samawati wal ard." That recitation touched the soul. Many fell into prostration without realizing it. The church hall was no longer just a building. It had become a place of divine guidance. Days later, the news spread across the city. 5 Christian pastors embrace Islam. It was all over the media. But this wasn't just a headline. This was the transformation of lives. That same church, once adorned solely with crosses, now had a small room set aside for prayer. It was named Al-Nur Hall, the Hall of Light. Pastor Fabio, now Abdullah Fabio, traveled to Turkey to study Islamic theology. Raphael Gomez and David Thompson enrolled in online Quranic studies at Al-Azhar University. Marcus and Franco began delivering Friday sermons for new Muslims in their city. And Ahmad quietly returned to his hometown. He never mentioned the event again. When people asked, "Was it really you who brought those priests to Islam?" he would only smile and say, "I do nothing. Allah does everything. I was only the messenger." And that message still echoes through the walls of that church today. Truth always arrives alone, but when it does, it awakens hearts. This is not just a debate. This is a revolution. One not with intellect alone, but with sincerity. Not spoken with the tongue, but felt with the heart. And its final result was guidance. May Allah grant us the same conviction, patience, and sincerity that lived in Ahmad's heart. Ameen. Ya Rab al-Alameen. The morning sun crept softly through the old stone arches of a quiet church in Milan, Italy. The world outside was peaceful. A gentle breeze brushed through the flower-filled courtyard, and birds chirped as if nothing could disturb the day. But within the walls of the church, a storm was brewing, silent and unseen by those on the streets. Inside, Sister Teresa stood at the altar. She was a woman hardened by years of frustration and a growing bitterness she could no longer hide. In her trembling hands was a copy of the Quran, left behind by a Muslim visitor days ago. Her face, usually calm and composed, was contorted with anger. As the parishioners watched in disbelief, she began to tear out page after page. "This is heresy. This must be destroyed," she muttered, each word laced with hatred she had never truly confronted before. Gasps rippled through the small group inside. Some watched in silence, too shocked to speak, while others shifted uneasily, their faith shaken by the display. Sister Teresa had always seemed so strong in her conviction, a leader among them, but now that conviction had taken a darker turn. With every page torn, she seemed to release years of pent-up disappointment and anger. Anger not just at other religions, but at her own doubts. Outside, Ahmad, a young Muslim student, was walking past the church on his way to a friend's home. He had lived in Milan for 2 years, often feeling the quiet tension that sometimes simmered beneath the surface in this foreign land. Today, he felt an uneasiness he couldn't explain. As he drew closer to the church, the sound of tearing paper and murmured shock caught his attention. Through the open doors, he saw Sister Teresa, her hands shaking, the holy book in pieces at her feet. Ahmad's heart wrenched. The Quran was not just paper to him. It was a symbol of his faith, his family, and his very identity. Seeing it treated with such contempt cut deeply. He hesitated, feeling the stares of the others, but he could not walk away. This was not just an insult to him, but to millions of Muslims around the world. Taking a deep breath, Ahmad entered the church. A sudden hush fell over the room as he stepped inside. Eyes turned, curious and tense. Sister Teresa paused mid-motion, her hand frozen above the torn pages. Ahmad locked eyes with her, his own gaze steady but wounded. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, voice trembling with a mix of pain and courage. In that moment, two worlds collided, anger and faith, doubt and dignity. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change both of their lives forever. The air inside the church grew thick with tension as Ahmad's question hung between them. Sister Teresa turned to face him, her expression hardening. For a moment, silence dominated, but her voice broke through like ice. "What do you know about truth?" she demanded, her words sharp, laced with arrogance and old wounds. "Islam is nothing but lies and heresy. You worship men, not God. There's no logic in your religion." The parishioners looked back and forth, some uneasy, others curious. Ahmad felt as if every eye was watching him, waiting to see how he would react. He felt a surge of anger but forced himself to stay calm. He knew that this was not only about defending his faith, but about demonstrating respect, even to someone who showed him none. "Respecting others' beliefs is not just an obligation, sister," Ahmad said, his voice steadier now. "It's the very teaching of every true religion." He looked around, sensing that the audience needed to hear this too. To tear the Quran is not just to insult Islam, but to disrespect the idea of compassion itself. Sister Teresa laughed coldly. "Compassion? If your God is so loving, why does he let people suffer? Why must you pray facing Mecca? Why 5 times a day? Where is the proof your Quran is true? And what makes your religion better than any other?" She threw these questions like darts, each one intended to cut, to humiliate, to shake Ahmad's confidence. Ahmad stood still, taking in the barrage of accusations. His heart beat faster, but he reminded himself of the patience his parents had taught him back in his childhood. "We don't worship humans," he replied calmly. "We worship the one Creator." Islam teaches us unity. Facing Mecca reminds us that wherever we are in the world, we are united before God. We pray 5 times a day to stay connected with the divine, to remember our purpose, to discipline ourselves. He continued, "The Quran is a living miracle, unchanged for 14 centuries, containing knowledge that matches modern science. But more than that, it is a guide to the soul, a book of mercy, justice, and wisdom." Sister Teresa's anger was unyielding. "Empty words," she spat. "You say suffering is a test, but how do you justify a world full of pain? If God is so just, why do innocents die and evil men prosper?" The crowd leaned in, sensing the debate shifting to deeper questions, ones that haunted everyone, regardless of faith. Ahmad hesitated for a moment, then answered softly, "Suffering is a test, not a punishment. It's a way for us to grow, to prove our faith, and to learn compassion for others. Every religion wrestles with the problem of pain, but Islam teaches that God is closer to us than our jugular vein. He never burdens a soul beyond what it can bear." The church fell silent again. Even Sister Teresa, for all her rage, seemed momentarily taken aback by the sincerity in Ahmad's answer. Yet the storm within her was not done brewing. She took a step forward, her eyes burning, ready to unleash her next challenge. Ahmad braced himself, knowing that words alone would not be enough to heal the wounds laid bare in that ancient, hallowed hall. As the churchgoers held their breath, Sister Teresa's anger reached a breaking point. She paced before Ahmad, her hands shaking with a mixture of fury and helplessness. "You speak of faith, but you know nothing of pain," she said, her voice quivering. "You speak of compassion, but you do not live in a world full of loss and disappointment like we do." Her face reddened, and her composure began to falter. Ahmad stood his ground, feeling the burden of defending not just himself, but the millions whose beliefs were often misunderstood or misrepresented. "Sister Teresa," he said, "pain is part of the human journey. Every soul, no matter its faith, faces its share of suffering. Islam teaches us to be patient, to trust in God's wisdom, and to reach out to others with kindness, especially in hardship. Our prayers, our fasting, our charity, these are ways to build empathy and resilience." But Sister Teresa would not be consoled. Her voice rose, echoing through the vaulted ceiling. "Don't speak to me of patience," she cried. "If your God truly cares, why does he not stop evil in the world? Why do children starve? Why do the innocent suffer? Don't tell me these are tests." For a moment, Ahmad was silent. The question was real, a question even believers sometimes struggled with. He looked around at the faces, some angry, some curious, some just sad. Then he spoke, quietly but with conviction. "Free will. That is the answer. God gives us all a choice, good or evil. The tests of this world are not punishments, but opportunities. Opportunities to rise above our circumstances, to show mercy, to learn gratitude even in pain." He paused, and for the first time, Sister Teresa's voice faltered. Doubt flickered in her eyes. The wall of anger she had built for years was showing cracks, but the old bitterness returned, and she could not admit defeat. "You don't understand," she screamed. "You think you can stand here and solve the world's pain with words? You think faith alone is enough?" The church was now charged with an almost physical tension. Before anyone could react, Sister Teresa rushed at Ahmad. In her rage, she grabbed him by the neck. Shock swept through the congregation. Some gasped. Others shouted for her to stop. But for Ahmad, the world slowed to a crawl. He struggled for breath, his vision blurring. But instead of anger, he felt a strange calm. This was the test of patience he had just spoken about. A real physical test, not just words. In that moment, Ahmad refused to fight back. Instead, he whispered, his voice barely audible, If you want to know the truth, ask. I will answer. But allow me to ask you as well." The words hung in the air. Sister Teresa froze, her grip slackening. Her mind reeled at Ahmad's restraint. Why wasn't he fighting? Why was he still so calm? She released him, confusion etched across her face. For a moment, the entire church was suspended between violence and revelation. Ahmad gasped for air, then looked her in the eyes. "Let's question each other, honestly. No more hate." And so, the story shifted. A battle not of fists, but of hearts and minds. The congregation watched, captivated by the sudden turn in the encounter. Sister Teresa stepped back, breathing hard, her anger now laced with uncertainty. Ahmad straightened himself, gathering the strength not only to speak, but to reach into the core of this conflict. "Let me ask you 5 things," Ahmad said, his voice stronger now. "If you answer these honestly, maybe we'll both understand each other better. First, if you believe in one God, why are there so many paths claimed to reach Him? Does that not contradict the concept of true oneness?" The question lingered, challenging centuries of theological debate. Sister Teresa struggled to respond. For years, she had been taught there were many paths, but Ahmad's words made her wonder if these were just comforting lies. "What's your next question?" she said, her tone softer, almost vulnerable. "Second, why do you believe Jesus is God when He Himself prays to God in the Gospels and expresses fear and sadness? How can the divine weep and beg?" Ahmad's gaze was gentle, but his questions penetrated deeply. Sister Teresa's lips parted, but no words came. She had read those passages many times, but never considered them from this angle. The audience could sense her inner turmoil. Ahmad continued, "Third, if God is truly love, why has so much violence been done in His name? Why do wars erupt over religion? Why do people kill for doctrine?" A heavy silence fell as everyone reflected on the question. "Fourth, if Jesus is truly God, why do we have no physical evidence? Why do we rely only on texts written by others centuries after His life?" Ahmad's questions were now echoing in the hearts of more than just Sister Teresa. He ended, "Finally, why do you think suffering means God loves us? In Islam, suffering is a test, not a punishment or a sign of favor, but a path to spiritual growth." Ahmad stepped back, allowing the questions to settle. Sister Teresa was left speechless. The certainty she had held for so long was shaken, the bitterness within her replaced by a profound confusion. She tried to summon her old defiance, but the answers would not come. Shame washed over her. She had entered this argument to prove her religion's superiority, but instead, her own foundations were trembling. The church was silent but for the quiet sobs that began to escape Sister Teresa. She turned to Ahmad, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to say anymore," she whispered, broken. "Perhaps I've been wrong all this time. I'm sorry for the hatred, for the pain, for my closed heart." In that moment, the walls between them, between faiths, between people, seemed to crumble. For a long moment, time seemed to stand still. Ahmad felt a wave of compassion for Sister Teresa. Where once he had seen only an enemy, now he saw a wounded soul, yearning for healing. The congregation watched as Sister Teresa, trembling with emotion, finally dropped to her knees. "I want to learn," she said through her tears. "Teach me about Islam. Show me the truth that gives you this strength and peace." Ahmad knelt beside her. His voice was gentle but full of conviction. "The path to truth begins with humility," he said. "Islam teaches us to love, not hate, to forgive, not seek revenge. We are all brothers and sisters in humanity. Our faith is not just about rituals, but about the transformation of the heart." He placed a comforting hand on Sister Teresa's shoulder, and for the first time, she smiled. a real trembling smile of relief. "Is it possible?" she asked, hope flickering in her eyes. "Can I change? Can I start over?" Ahmad nodded. "Anyone who sincerely seeks the truth is welcome. Islam is not a club for the perfect. It is a refuge for the humble. You can start your journey today." The congregation, once divided, now gathered around them, some in tears, others simply awestruck by the change unfolding before them. Sister Teresa repeated after Ahmad, the words of the Shahada trembling from her lips. "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." The sense of peace that settled over her was profound, as if a lifetime's burden had been lifted. Ahmad embraced her, tears of joy in his eyes. The debate, which began with hatred and violence, had ended in forgiveness and understanding. It was a moment none present would ever forget, a living proof that the human heart, when humbled and opened, can be transformed by the light of truth. Sister Teresa rose, her past anger replaced by newfound tranquility. "Thank you, Ahmad," she said, "for showing me a way out of darkness." Ahmad smiled. "Welcome to Islam, my sister. May your new journey be blessed, and may peace fill your heart." As the sun continued its path over Milan, the church was no longer a place of division, but a symbol of hope, a place where a single act of patience, courage, and truth had sparked a miracle, changing 2 lives, and perhaps many more. Peace be upon you, and Allah's mercy and blessings. This story begins in a small, overlooked town in the heart of Texas, USA. A town once famous for its art and culture now found itself in the grip of a strange and growing movement: sun worship. The old town hall, once a hub for concerts and exhibitions, had been transformed into a spiritual sanctuary. But not for God, rather for the sun. At its center stood a large, echoing hall adorned with golden drapes and statues of celestial flames. People from the surrounding areas gathered here every week to worship what they believed to be the true source of life. At the head of this strange congregation was Jack, a tall white man in his early 40s, draped in gold, wearing a crown shaped like the sun. Jack was not a fool. He was once a well-known philosophy graduate from a top-tier university. But life had scarred him. After a series of personal tragedies and disillusionment with organized religions, especially Christianity, Jack rejected all celestial doctrines. In his pain, he built a new sect, Solarism, declaring the sun as mankind's only true deity. "The sun," he preached, "feeds us, lights our days, drives nature, and gives us life. What more do we need?" Jack's sermons often took a darker tone. He would mock all Abrahamic religions, but Islam received the harshest attacks. His videos spread online, showing him publicly tearing Quranic pages, mocking the Prophet, peace be upon him, and challenging the Muslim world. One day, in front of a cheering crowd, he shouted, "If your God truly exists, let him send someone worthy to face me. If not, then we all know who the greater power is, the sun, not your so-called Allah." His words echoed around the internet like a storm. The video was reposted, reacted to, and condemned by Muslims around the globe. Many scholars advised people to ignore such provocations, calling it a test of patience. But across the sea, in a small and humble neighborhood in Istanbul, one young man was silently moved. His name was Ahmet Yıldız, a 23-year-old working in a textile factory during the day and studying Islamic theology at night. The son of a retired imam and a mother who sold homemade food for extra income, Ahmet was not famous. He was not from a scholarly family or a prestigious university. But he had something more powerful: sincerity, courage, and love for Islam that ran deep in his bones. When Ahmet saw Jack's video, he didn't feel anger. He felt responsibility. Something in his heart whispered, "You must go." Not for fame, not for vengeance, but to defend the truth with knowledge, wisdom, and patience. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stood in prayer, crying in sujud, Ya Allah, if you choose me for this task, guide me. I have nothing but you. The next morning, Ahmet sat in the corner of his small room, the early Istanbul sun casting golden rays across the prayer mat still laid out. His mother brought him tea, unaware of the storm brewing in her son's heart. Are you okay, Oğlum? She asked gently. He looked up, his eyes calm but intense. Anne, I need to go to America. She paused, confused. Why, my son? Are you in trouble? He shook his head. No, there's a man there. A man who insults Allah, the Quran, our prophet. And he's calling for someone to face him. No one is going. I feel like I must. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the teacup down. Ahmet, you're just one boy. You're not a scholar. You don't have protection or money. Why you? Ahmet looked down. Because truth doesn't always need someone powerful, just someone willing. If no one else will go, then maybe Allah has chosen me. His father, overhearing the conversation, walked in silently. He was a quiet man, once an imam in the local mosque, now retired due to illness. Sitting beside his son, he said softly, You remind me of the young companions of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Brave, unknown but full of conviction. If your heart is clear, go. But don't speak to prove yourself. Speak to defend Allah's word. Let your niyyah be pure. Ahmet wept quietly. That day, he sold his phone and borrowed money from a family friend to book a one-way ticket to Dallas. With only a small bag, his Quran, and a notebook full of points he had written down from countless nights of research, Ahmet prepared himself mentally and spiritually. He studied everything he could about solarism, Jack's past debates, his philosophy, and arguments. He read about metaphysics, the scientific limitations of the sun, the Quranic descriptions of creation, and how to debate with wisdom. But above all, he made dua, long, tearful duas that soaked his pillow every night. He fasted on Mondays and Thursdays. He offered tahajjud daily. He wasn't just preparing for a debate. He was preparing for jihad, not the kind fought with weapons, but with words, heart, and truth. When the day of departure came, his mother hugged him long and hard. I have nothing but dua to give you, my son. May Allah make your tongue the sword of truth. At the airport, his father whispered in his ear, Remember Surah Al-Furqan, and say, The truth has come, and falsehood has vanished. Indeed, falsehood is ever bound to vanish. In 2581, Ahmet's journey to the U.S. was long and lonely. He landed at Dallas-Fort Worth with only a few dollars in his pocket. No sponsor, no welcoming party, just tawakkul. He found a small, cheap hostel near the town where Jack's sect held their gatherings. The night before the debate, Ahmet didn't sleep. He stood in Qiyam ul-Layl, pouring his soul into prayer. The room was dim, cold, and quiet. But inside his chest, a fire burned. Not of pride or ego, but of love. Love for Allah, for Rasulullah, for the Quran, for truth, and for those who had gone astray. The sun rose gently over the sleepy Texan town as Ahmet stepped out of his hostel. Dressed in simple, clean white clothes, his Quran in one hand and his notebook in the other, he walked towards the grand hall that once hosted art shows, now decorated with golden banners and images of flames. A massive sign above the building read, The Ultimate Debate, The Sun versus God. Beneath it, in bold yellow letters, hosted by Jack, the Enlightened One. People flooded in, most of them wearing bright yellow or orange clothing to symbolize their allegiance to the sun. Music blared from inside the hall, tribal drums, electronic echoes, and chanting in praise of the sun. But amidst this chaotic noise, Ahmet's lips moved silently, repeating dhikr, La ilaha illallah, Hasbi Allahu la ilaha illa huwa. As he reached the entrance, people turned and laughed. Is this the one they sent? Someone jeered. He looks like a monk, not a warrior, yelled another. Amit smiled softly. You laugh at my clothes, but wait till you hear the message, he thought to himself. Inside the hall, thousands had gathered. The atmosphere was more like a circus than a debate. Yellow lights flashed. Incense filled the air. The stage was bathed in golden hues, with a strange throne in the middle. And there stood Jack, towering, draped in a long golden russin, his head adorned with a crown resembling the sun's rays. His expression was mocking, his body language loud and theatrical. So the challenger arrives, Jack bellowed into the microphone. A young boy in white thinking he can stand against the power of the sun? The crowd roared with laughter. Amit walked quietly to the podium set for him. He picked up the microphone but said nothing at first. He simply gazed at the crowd, then softly said, Assalamu alaikum. A few gasps. Most remained silent. I did not come to defeat anyone. I came to let the truth speak for itself. Jack smirked. Then let's begin. I have 5 questions for your God. The audience clapped wildly. First, Jack began, if your Allah is all-knowing and ever-watchful, why did he create people who would disobey him and burn in hell? Amit responded without flinching. Would you say a teacher is evil for allowing students to take an exam, knowing some will fail? The purpose is not punishment. The purpose is responsibility. Allah gave us free will, and with that comes the opportunity to choose, not to be forced. Jack raised his eyebrows, clearly not expecting such clarity. Second, he barked, how can you believe in a God who asks you to pray 5 times a day? Is he so insecure he needs constant praise? Amit smiled. Do you breathe only once a day? Prayer is not for him. It is for us. To reset, to connect, to find peace. Just like the sun rises and sets with regularity, our hearts need spiritual rhythm. The crowd fell quieter. Whispers of surprise replaced laughter. Jack tried again. Third, if your God is so merciful, why is the world full of pain? Amit replied, rain nourishes, but floods destroy. Fire warms, but also burns. The same force can serve or hurt depending on how it's used. Pain in this world is often the result of human choice, not divine cruelty. And even pain has purpose. It awakens, humbles, and teaches. Gasps echoed. Some in the audience began to listen, instead of laugh. Fourth, Jack pushed, why are your scriptures full of things we can't see? Angels? Paradise? Hell? Amit replied calmly, can you see love, grief, dignity? Yet you feel them, know them. The unseen is not imaginary. It's just beyond your tools. Faith does not mean blindness. It means trusting what is real, even if not visible. Jack's eyes narrowed. His 5th question came slower. If your God is real, why hasn't he ever shown himself? Amit looked up. And yet you worship the sun, which you've never spoken to. It never answered your cries. Allah speaks through his words, his creation, and his mercy. But the ears of the heart must be open to hear. Silence fell across the hall. The crowd that had jeered was now motionless. And Jack, the self-declared enlightened one, was beginning to blink. For a long moment, no one in the Golden Hall spoke. The echoes of Amit's last answer still lingered like a gentle wind cutting through arrogance. Jack lowered his microphone, his once fiery eyes now slightly dimmed. The crowd that had mocked the young Turkish man just minutes ago now sat in stunned silence. The lights still flashed yellow, the banners still waved above, but something deep within the room had shifted. It was no longer a performance. It was a reckoning. Amit gently closed his notebook. Then, lifting his gaze to meet Jack's, he said, "You asked 5 questions. Now, with your permission, I'd like to ask 5 in return." There was a ripple of murmurs among the audience. Jack stiffened, caught off guard, but tried to maintain his composure. "Go ahead," he said, trying to appear unfazed. "Let's see what your divine knowledge has to offer." Amit took a quiet breath and asked his first question. "If the sun is your god, why does it rise and set without its own will?" He pointed calmly toward the tall glass window behind the stage, where the real sun hung high in the afternoon sky. "Every day it follows a path, rising, setting, never changing course. A god should be sovereign, not a servant of natural law." Jack tried to laugh, but it was forced. He opened his mouth, but no answer came. The logic was too clean, the question too precise. Ahmet continued. "Second," he said, "if your God is the sun, why does it give life but also take it?" He looked across the room. How many have died from drought, from heat stroke, from skin cancer? If it's divine, why such contradiction? Jack blinked rapidly. The crowd began to stir. A woman in the back wiped her eyes. A man lowered his golden sun amulet. "Third question," Amit said softly. "Can your God hear?" Have you ever cried alone, begged for help, and received an answer from it? He paused. "We Muslims weep before Allah in the silence of the night. And somehow peace always comes. A comfort that no fireball in the sky could ever send." A small child in his mother's lap tugged at her sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, "if the sun can't hear me, who do I pray to?" His mother began to sob, holding him tightly. Jack swallowed hard, and Amit asked his fourth, "If the sun is life, why can it not revive the dead?" He turned to Jack gently. "You lost someone, didn't you?" Jack froze. "You lit candles, said rituals, maybe even prayed to the sun. But did it answer you? Did it bring them back? Only the one who created life can return it." Jack's eyes moistened. He looked away, visibly trembling. "And now," Amit said, voice trembling slightly, "my final question. If the sun is God, why has it never spoken to you?" The hall fell absolutely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. Amit stepped forward slowly. Allah speaks through the Quran, through signs, through comfort in pain, through justice and mercy. If your God is silent, how can it be alive? Jack collapsed onto the edge of his golden podium. His hands covered his face. For the first time in years, he had no words, only tears. The congregation began to cry. Some clutched their chest. Others fell into sujud, not knowing why, but feeling the presence of something they had never truly known: truth. Amit looked around at these broken souls. This was no longer a debate. It was a dawah, and hearts were returning home. The golden lights above flickered uncertainly, as if unsure whether to continue shining on a lie. The atmosphere inside the once proud hall of sun worship had transformed into something sacred, something raw. Jack, once towering in arrogance, now knelt with his head bowed low, his golden robe dragging on the floor like a burden he had just begun to feel. The crowd sat silently, many with tear-streaked faces, as if witnessing a funeral, not of a man, but of falsehood itself. Amit slowly approached Jack. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout victory. He simply placed his hand gently on Jack's shoulder. "You searched for light," he whispered. "But the light you sought was never in the sky. It was always within reach, in the one who created the sky." Jack trembled. "All these years, I thought I was wise. I thought I was enlightened." Tears flowed freely down his cheeks. "But I was hollow, loud but lost, angry and alone." He looked up into Amit's eyes like a child begging for guidance. "Tell me, who is your God, the one who sent you?" Amit knelt beside him and recited softly, "Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." Jack repeated, word by word, trembling, weeping, until the hall was filled with a silence so deep it felt holy. And then, slowly, steadily, the congregation began to follow. One by one, a middle-aged woman whispered the Shahada. A teenager clutched his mother's hand and repeated it tearfully. A former temple guard removed his golden chain and bent his head low in sujood. Soon the very hall that once glorified the sun echoed with a chorus, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. Amit sat quietly, unable to contain his tears. This was not his victory. It was Allah's. The truth had entered hearts, not through anger or argument, but through compassion, reason, and divine light. News of the mass conversion spread across social media and Islamic news channels. Videos of the debate were shared worldwide. And within a month, the once sun-worshipping temple was repurposed into a masjid. Its walls were repainted, the stage removed, and the golden idol taken down. In its place was a simple wooden mihrab facing Makkah. A calligraphy of Allah and Muhammad hung above it. Jack, now Jamal al-Din, began studying Islam formally. He enrolled in an online program offered by the Islamic University of Medina for new Muslims. Amit returned to Turkey, where his hometown welcomed him as a hero. But he refused any fame. I only did what any Muslim should do, he told the local masjid. When you see falsehood raise its head, you don't run. You don't fight it with hate. You show the truth, with love, with ilm, and with tawakkul. Months later, Jamal wrote a blog post that touched millions. I used to believe the sun gave life, but I now know life comes only from the ever-living, Allah. The sun rises and sets, but Allah never sleeps. The sun can burn or fade, but His mercy never dims. In Amit's eyes, I didn't just see a boy. I saw a mirror reflecting what I had lost: peace, faith, direction. The story, later adapted into a documentary titled From Sun to Surah, won hearts across cultures. People from atheist, agnostic, and pantheistic backgrounds began reaching out to learn more about Islam. What started as a provocation ended as a revolution of hearts. Ahmet, back in Istanbul, visited his parents often. One evening after Maghrib prayer, his father looked at him and said, "You brought back not just people, but dignity to a message. And in doing so, you reminded us all, truth doesn't need fame. It needs sincerity." Ahmet bowed his head. "I did nothing. I was only a means. Allah does the rest. So if one day you feel small, unworthy, or helpless in front of falsehood, remember the boy from Turkey, the one who walked into a hall of mockery and left it filled with sajda. And remember, guidance belongs to Allah, but He sends it through those who believe, no matter how unknown. May Allah make us from those. Ameen.